Welcome to another episode of Lifting the Lid on Technology. My name is Barry White, your host and VCIO at Softsource vBridge. Today's episode is brought to you by Veeam, our trusted partner for data management and protection, ensuring your business continuity and resilience in the world of AI. Keep up to date and read more insights, including the subjects covered in today's podcast at svbgroup.co.nz/blog, or search for Softsource vBridge on LinkedIn, where you can leave us a comment. Well, my guest today is Ben Young, the field CTO at Veeam, and previously head of cloud products at Softsource vBridge. Good to see you again, Ben.
Yeah, good to be back and talking to you, Barry. It's been a while.
It's been a while. I think it was during COVID, I think we did our first podcast together, if I've got my memory serves me correct.
Oh, your memory's better than mine. I know we've talked about a couple of interesting things, but I know as I was kind of on the way into this role, we talked about setting something up once I'd sort of I'd settled on this side. So yeah, it's good to finally get behind the microphone, as they say, and yeah, we'll get into some interesting topics, no doubt.
So Ben, I think probably a good starting point, and I guess for those who don't know you, maybe just talk a little bit about your journey to Veeam, because you're obviously heavily involved in Veeam while you're here at Softsource vBridge, and it's obviously been a journey there. But do you want to talk a bit about that, and also your role as a Veeam Vanguard as well, which I'm sure our audience would like to know more about?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I started on the cloud side of the Softsource vBridge, so the vBridge side of the SVB, and yeah, I learned all this technology through kind of the development of your platform, so my cloud space, so the portal that people interact with on a daily basis to run all their services. And as such, I got to know a lot of vendors really well, but in particular Veeam, had a really good working relationship with them, and got on to their Veeam Vanguard program, which is kind of their kind of influencers program, for the lack of a better term, and got to, the special treatment, which was really neat to go deep and see forward-looking roadmaps. And that kind of gave me a lot of exposure to the international scene too, which when the role came up at Veeam, it was a tough decision to make to leave Softsource vBridge, but at the same time, I knew I was kind of ready to go and spread my wings a little bit, a bit wider than New Zealand. So yeah, that was kind of my journey into Veeam, really building up those relationships through partnerships at Softsource vBridge, and then the Vanguard program, and yeah, everything in between.
So, on that subject, in your role now, and let's kind of talk about that, you obviously spend a lot of time traveling around the world as well, and speaking at various different events. And I guess one of the topics I wanted to talk to you about was GPU as a service, which, as head of cloud products, you played an integral role in the launch of that service while you were here at Softsource vBridge. But with that kind of, through that lens, and I think that a lot's happened in 18 months, particularly in the AI space. Some of the things I think our audience would be interested in is, I guess, first and foremost, to describe what is GPU as a service. But one of the questions I'm asked all the time is, well, what are the scenarios? What should we be thinking about public cloud versus GPU as a service, and why would we go down that route, not the other? I just wonder if you could kind of talk to that as a subject, and we can expand on that from there.
Yeah, I mean, so I suppose GPU as a service, like boiled down, right, is a slice of a GPU. As providers like you guys, you buy really big data center grade GPUs, and with the technology you've got at that hypervisor layer, you can slice bits of those GPU up and give someone 8 gig of a 48 gig of memory kind of GPU, or they can have the whole thing. And so, much like customers want to consume infrastructure as a service view, like on an hourly basis and kind of burst up and down, they can also then consume those GPUs. And I think we're seeing this sort of fundamental shift, not just because of AI, but we're seeing a lot of other applications. I think as I was leaving there, you had a really good customer win with a customer who was on a more traditional kind of remote desktop services environment. And it was growing, and they were struggling with sprawl of that service that they had, because other applications like Chrome and even PDF viewers and Office all require GPU acceleration. So we're seeing this sort of fundamental shift away from just being CPU as the accelerator in the data center, or in any of our devices, to also being able to leverage GPU. So I think this is naturally going to slot into most organizations' requirements, either now or into the kind of short-term future. And so by you guys being able to offer this privately, it can sit alongside their existing infrastructure that they might already have with you. It's also in New Zealand. They can connect privately in different ways to your cloud over, say, a public cloud provider. But really, when we talk about slicing up the GPU, it's not too dissimilar to renting something in the public cloud. But I suppose that sovereignty play is, certainly in APJ, I talk to a lot of different countries within Asia Pacific, and sovereignty is still a really big thing. A lot of governments are standing up sovereign clouds or trying to work out how to keep data and information in the country that they reside in. And so that sovereignty plays that really big. And then, of course, we've got AI, and we can't ignore it. Every conversation almost starts with AI. And the requirement for these GPUs for delivering inferencing capabilities or training, whatever that might be, isn't going to go away anytime soon. So with customers having choice that they can start consuming those GPUs within the data center alongside that existing infrastructure, I think really puts you guys in the box seat for being able to deliver these kind of modern applications, be that AI or just what people are now expecting from their applications. Yeah,
I think that data sovereignty one's an interesting point. We touched on that on a previous podcast. We were talking with HP Aruba, and I even think Microsoft's motivations for coming to New Zealand were partly driven by that. And I think the New Zealand government in particular, there's been increasing discussions here in New Zealand about data sovereignty and what that means. And I guess with AI, even more and more distribution of computer resources, these questions are being raised from a compliance point of view, right?
Yeah, definitely. And like the landscape's changed. You think about the kind of ChatGPT sort of hit the world by storm, and it was like super popular. And then, we've seen other competitors, other model makers come out with them as a service. But at the same time, we're also seeing these open source models or self-hostable models, at least, and the technology that powers those kind of come up to parity. So we're seeing a lot of these models now. So it's truly a viable option now to take these models and self-host them. And from two fields, obviously sovereignty is a big one. The privacy of that, that you can guarantee that your information is not going to be used to retrain these models, and inadvertently you could have some information leaked into these models that you don't necessarily want. So that's a powerful kind of story too, is that kind of that privacy thing. And then, of course, there's the cost side of things. If you're using it as a service, these PaaS plays, you're charged per token, whereas bringing it in and self-hosting it in a GPU as a service layer gives you that predictability. You can scale the GPUs as you need to, and you're going to get that fixed cost as you scale those, versus what happens if 200 more people hit that chat service or that other AI service that you had been previously using, and then costs spike. So what controls can you put over top of that? So yeah, GPU service and self-hosting those kind of in the data center, I think we'll see more of, particularly as those models mature, people upskill with how to host those models, how to run this kind of new infrastructure, so to speak. We'll see more of it.
What about that kind of question of generalization? The public cloud is obviously designed to handle quite a broad range of different types of AI applications, and obviously machine learning is one of those. But my understanding is that particularly in this GPU as a service space, the fact these models can be specifically tuned is also a big driver for a lot of organizations looking at that model in preference to the public cloud.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the publicly available models through kind of the more SaaS delivered kind of method, I suppose, like ChatGPT, Claude, kind of Anthropic. Those models are, they tend to be fixed. Some of them have fine-tuning capabilities on them, and you can fine-tune them. Whereas we're seeing also a pivot to this like actual fine-tuning of models. And so that's a lot easier to do, arguably, kind of on your own infrastructure or infrastructure that you can manage everything between the two, particularly if you're trying to fine-tune it with a lot of data, right? Where does that data, how do you ingress that data into those providers? So by putting kind of leveraging these foundational models, these really big models that are trained with, the entire internet and again, of all this information, you can build upon those foundational models and actually start tuning the parameters, start getting to speak more like you, to start understanding some more information about your organization. And that's going to deliver your custom chat experience. So, or not just chat, but, broader kind of applications as well. So yeah, by being able to host them yourself and then fine tune it through your own kind of AI data pipelines, your own AI systems in a private manner is a capability that more and more people are exploring.
And as you say, cost is a big factor too. organizations start to dip their toe into the public cloud, start to realize that if you are building these specialist applications, it can get really expensive, right?
100% cost and security too, right? Like, I'm sure you've probably talked to many organizations that are struggling with what AI policy do they put in place, what, reinforcing with their employees that, hey, we shouldn't just be pasting whole documents that are relatively sensitive to our organization into kind of SaaS delivered, models that we haven't either commercially bought or sort of tipped the option to say you mustn't use my data to retrain. And, OpenAI is a really good example. Even through some of their paid subscriptions, unless you specifically kind of opt out, in theory, your data's fair game. So whatever you're pasting in there, they in theory could reuse in some capacity to retrain the model for analytics, that sort of things. Whereas you can also buy those models privately through some private providers such as Microsoft. But GPU as a service and all the tools and all the other models out there, there's some great open, not necessarily open source, but kind of have got nice licensing, we'll put it that way, that you can take those off and then run them. And the cool thing is they're also broken down because the amount of AI infrastructure, the amount of GPUs that a ChatGPT type service would need to run is immense. It's like the scale that they are running this at is crazy. But the cool thing is they can quantize them down. And so we can run a smaller parameter model. So it's fully viable for you to run a smaller version of those big models that are out there on kind of relatively modest hardware if you need to.
So it's a really, I guess, to put that into layman's terms, models, large language models vary in size quite dramatically. There's some very large models and some actually quite small ones, right? And you can really install the model that's specific to your application, right? And no more, which is where the cost savings comes from, of course. You mentioned Anthropic in there, and that's probably a good lead-in to talk about Veeam's MCP, or Model Context Protocol. There's a new acronym I'm going to have to remember now. Do you want to talk to that a little bit? I know there's been some fairly significant announcements around that from Veeam. And for our audience, could you really describe what it is, I guess, first and foremost?
Yeah, so Model Context Protocol the protocol was created by Anthropic, so another AI provider. They have things like Claude Desktop and Claude models and models like Sonnet. But this protocol is, as it is kind of described, it's a protocol. And so it's an open protocol that everyone can adopt. And it's been really interesting watching it come. It was really kind of only announced the end of November, if I recall, or start of December last year. And we've already seen major providers adopt support for this particular protocol, including Veeam, which we'll talk about in a minute. And Windows, I think Microsoft just had an event in the last few weeks, and they've announced sort of native support for this Model Context Protocol within Windows. So what it is it's effectively a way to abstract out some of the logic, and people are likening it to sort of a USB moment for AI. So you imagine if Veeam is a peripheral, we can plug into your AI system and we can kind of bring applications and information and data to you where you want to use AI. So you might have strict requirements to use this type of model on this infrastructure and this chatbot, and we can plug into that. And you can leverage all of the things that we've built, but on an LLM, for example, that you want to use, in a data center that you want to use. And so MCP enables that very easily, whereas before you would have to write all your own custom integrations with our upstream services or upstream services into tools. But the neat thing with MCP is it doesn't just stop at kind of upstream, like we'll call them web services for the lack of a kind of better term, but just to kind of normalize it, these upstream services, it also has access to local resources. So on the main stage, when we announced MCP support, I did a demo the second day, and it was all about natural language search and finding information in your backups and helping people find the information that they need more easily through natural language. And I did a demo where we found that information. We then got an LLM, in this case, something different to what we were using in our cloud, and it was Claude Desktop we were leveraging this with. So I was on my laptop, had Claude Desktop there, was able to talk with basically your backup data. And I was like, that's a great summary of those pieces of information that I found in my backup. Could you please then create a Word document? And it was able to leverage a local MCP server effectively that was for Microsoft Word. So you start blowing out those use cases. We're going to be in a world where maybe we won't use technology the same way we are today, you think about, we go to a web browser, we download a document, we open it, we might copy and paste information. But now we've got a chance to connect all these systems together through a common interface, and we can interface with natural language. And that MCP client, whatever that might be Windows, or it might be a custom application that you've developed, that will use a large language model to work out what systems it needs to call and what it needs to do in order to kind of complete our task that we put in. And so MCP is the kind of key to unlocking all of this, because it's a standardized protocol that can be kind of used by anyone that wants to implement support for it. So we'll see different clients like Windows and other chatbot clients, no doubt, and maybe browser plugins be able to leverage this. But you'll also see vendors like us make a commitment to MCP, and there's some really good examples out there of MCP servers and upstream services that have been exposed. And so Veeam's commitment is to expose as much of this as we can within Veeam Data Cloud to our clients, to unlock all the AI-powered applications that we're developing downstream to our users so they can use them where they want to. And that's fundamentally what we've committed to. And you'll see that across the board, including Veeam's on-premise products, you'll be able to start talking with those. And so it's early days yet. Like I say, the protocol's only 6 or 7 months old, but we're in the process of planning, well down the path of planning that out. In fact, we've got some MCP servers running here, and what I kind of showed a tech preview of it, Veeam On, is kind of exactly where we're heading with that.
So I find that concept of using your backup data instead of live data kind of an interesting concept. Do you want to give us, again, similar to what when we talked about large language models and GPU as a service, do you want to give us some scenarios of how that could be advantageous to an organization on what can you do with a backup that perhaps you is easier with a backup, or is even can't be done at all with live data but can be done with a backup that's going to add value?
The obvious one that can't be done with production data is data that's just no longer there, historic data. There's a lot of information that we hold for a very long time within data backups. And understanding what type of information is there and doing things with them. Like in your world, you're hosting a lot of customers' virtual machines on your infrastructure, and your service desk is getting requests every day for information. And I know firsthand from when I was there, you would always get customers that would ring up and they say, "Hi, I'm looking for this document," and it was definitely in that folder on that date. And you'd go back and look at that folder on that date, and it just wasn't there. Yeah. So like one really powerful use case is just helping us find that information more quickly, because we've indexed it, we can understand it. Now that sounds awfully like a normal kind of search index and a search system, because it is. But when we start applying some sort of AI technologies to that, we can start getting this kind of hybrid search mentality. So we can still search for keywords and metadata-based kind of filtering, dates and things. But we can also use semantic understanding. So I can type in a sentence of what I'm looking for. The demo I did, as a really simple way of breaking it down, I searched for marine, but it also found words that were related to marine, such as ocean. And so that's a really good example of being able to just semantically type in what I want, and it will understand what I want to search for. And it will also look for all those related documents around the outside and likely return it. Because chances are I call, a car part, maybe something slightly different to you, whatever that might be. And we're able to hit on all of those with keywords, but also semantic search. But then filtered over the top is actually just searching for what I want. So I might type marine power generation from 2021. That might be my search query. We can use a large language model to break that query down. So marine power generation was the actual query. And from 2021, is a filter. You think about the way we would normally filter data. It would be typing in a search query and then maybe kind of plugging down advanced and then typing in the kind of selecting all the different filters that we want and then clicking search again. Whereas we can get large language models to do all of that heavy lifting kind of for us to help us find that information that we need more accurately.
I can also see applications, for example, many years ago, I worked in the finance sector and we got involved in a number of legal cases, where there was a discovery exercise that required some quite deep forensic evidence to be lifted from historical data and snapshots of data. And the chain of custody of that data also became really important to the whole presentation of that information legally, and trying to do that just from a live data set would be impossible, right?
Yeah, e-discovery is like a very valid use case. You think about the normal e-discovery process is very time consuming, mainly because they have to oversample results because, they have to return so much. And then it's a manual task to go through. Whereas we can start using AI to start evaluating those. We can start returning more accurate results, hopefully less results, but then actually use different AI models. Could be a large language model, it could be something else, to actually start helping us triage some of the information, start looking through and go, was that actually relevant or not? Like the keywords match, but this has actually got nothing to do with that particular case because of X, Y, and Z. So AI is changing the game from like an e-discovery type perspective. There's use cases already out there, papers that are written by the kind of Deloittes of the world that I was reading through the other day. AI is changing that game completely. And so we can leverage all of these tools to help us get to where we need. And that's kind of what we're looking to achieve within Veeam Data Cloud is look at what customers commonly need to solve and start building specific AI applications within our Veeam Data Cloud that actually attaches to the information that we have, be that in M365 or kind of in more traditional kind of backups of infrastructure, in Veeam Data Cloud Vault. But then not only exposing those applications within the kind of user interface of our own backup as a service platform, but exposing those downstream. So that if someone does need to go and start doing an e-discovery case or finding information, they can use it on the tool that they're already using on their desktop. They don't have to log onto that portal to do it. And that's the power of kind of exposing that via MCP, is being able to bring the systems to you where you want to be.
The other thing I wanted to pick your brains on a little bit is this term sort of data readiness or AI readiness of data information. I guess from a concept point of view, I'm just interested in some of your thoughts about that, because that's the big question a lot of our customers are asking us, well, what do we have to do to get ready for AI? And, apart from all the obvious things around security and access to data, what's some of your other thoughts around that with your Veeam hat on?
Yeah, I mean, from an AI readiness, like understanding what data lives where. We're actually trying to sort of solve that at the moment. If you're just going to go and train a model or put a chatbot over your entire file share, you're probably going to have a bad time. It's probably going to give you the undesirable results, be it from a quality perspective. But when was the last time someone scanned those directories for personal information that maybe shouldn't be there? And if you're feeding that into a system, making sure you know what data lives where, what's sensitive data, what's not. You mentioned security. Obviously, that's like at the forefront, not only from is the AI system that we're using to interact with those secure? Are we making sure that no one's trying to jailbreak and get around it with some clever prompting? Are we stripping the PII data and things as it's going in? Are we storing the logs and things appropriately? But also, if we are training models, and that's not necessarily going to be the case for everyone, are we making sure that who has access to where that training data resides? Model poisoning is a real thing, where adversarials will try and get information into your training data, into your training system. So making sure that they're secured, you can detect anomalies that are going in there, because you don't ultimately want either bias to be introduced to your models or to produce kind of undesirable results. So making sure that you're securing those kind of AI pipelines. And when it comes to getting your data ready, just understanding that information, what information lives where, and what you're trying to get out of the model. Like maybe not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing that you're building isn't the way. Maybe you might have several models that you're leveraging to do your task. So understanding your information, making sure that it's kind of readily available and secured is key. And if ideally you can get it into a format that's kind of easier to train on, because we have to open these documents up to kind of understand them. So text documents are really easy because it's just text. But how do we deal with kind of, you imagine a kind of a marketing brochure for a product or service. It's going to be in a completely different format. It's maybe going to have columns. It's going to have images. It's going to have tables of information. How can we understand what images are in there with an image model? Or do we just ignore it? What do we do with the table information? How do we deal with those? Do we read the headings out? And what format do we put them in? Having these kind of systems that can really understand documents. There's a real big move to kind of agentic AI. A guy, Andrew Ng, has got like an agentic document understanding kind of engine out there at the moment that can kind of take a step back instead of it just doing a single pass over a document and extracting the information. it actually takes a step back and looks at the document visually and goes, well, hang on, it looks like there's 3 columns here. Maybe I should process this in that order. And it tries to look through and add a bit more context to the document passing. So it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all. It's about sort of understanding your use case, understanding the types of data that's there, what format it's in, and getting it ready for kind of ingestion into kind of a model training environment.
I think that agentic question is kind of an interesting one. Some of the early observations we've seen with different organizations attempting to develop these agents, specifically around tools like SharePoint and so forth, have struggled quite a bit because to some degree the unpredictability of some of that live data, whereas I guess this swings back again to one of the business cases for using backup data, which once it's been backed and catalogued and time-stamped and all that sort of stuff, the repositories themselves could arguably be a little bit more controllable than live data. Would that be a fair point?
Sort of. I mean, I suppose a lot of the systems that I've been dealing with typically have a level of processing going. So if we're talking about a chatbot use case is kind of the hello world of AI systems. A lot of that information is already processed. So it's processed, and then we might chunk those documents up and we stick that information into a vector database. And then when we chat, we can kind of, the system that we're kind of using to chat, we'll be able to look up and reference kind of chunks of information. Then we pull it back, and then we might do some massaging of that information inside the system, and then we pass it to the large language model and go, hey, Ben asked this question. Here's 10 relevant chunks from that, from our database or our knowledge store or stores. And then what's the answer? So that's kind of like the hello world. So typically these systems aren't using live data, but agents and tool use in particular allow us to actually do that. So maybe one of the examples would be I might have asked for some information about a customer, and maybe it needs to connect to our CRM or our accounting system in real time to pull some data back. And so that's what those large language models are very good at, is understanding what we want. And we can plug all of that same infrastructure, the tool use, into agentic systems. And the nice thing with agentic systems is it's a bit less kind of just in and then out. There's obviously some logic in the middle there. Agents we can give a task to. We can say, hey, when you're complete, like this is the task that you've been given. These are the tools and the other agents you can interact with. You just go work out how you want to do it. And I don't care if you want to pass information back towards each other, send it to a review for a reviewer. The reviewer can send it back to the copywriter at the start, whatever it might be. But it will just kind of work as a system. And each of those agents can have access to different tools, which is pretty neat. And so it'll work until it's kind of think it's achieved our goals. And we can obviously set boundaries within those agentic systems to say, hey, don't just go around forever. Like if you get through 4 loops, you're probably done. We also don't want the cost to blow out and stuff too. So yeah, having these agentic systems that are a bit more adaptable, and it probably speaks a little bit to your retry logic there around if SharePoint was down or if it didn't get a desirable result back. Maybe it could do a retry rather than just kind of going, oh no, that failed and back out. So agentic systems are particularly good for that, kind of constantly be able to think on its feet until it's kind of achieved that goal, and we can make sure that we put the right bounds in place. So be that rules, who it can talk to, what tools it's got access to. That's kind of the key. And almost certainly we're heading kind of in an agentic world. Most AI systems at scale will be some form of agentic system.
But on that subject, we're sort of halfway through the year now. What's sort of coming up for you that you're really excited about? Yeah,
look, I think it's the release of more products within Veeam Data Cloud for me. This is kind of the tool that's going to bring all of our workloads together. So under our backup as a service offering, but it's going to be the foundation for us to build out kind of that next wave of data resilience. So when we think about data resilience, it's not just about protecting the data; it's about us understanding that data, like we've just talked about. So what systems can we put in place? And so our AI roadmap's pretty aggressive around what we're wanting to achieve. And key to all of this is really Veeam Data Cloud, because that's where all these services are going to be powered. We can start looking cross workload then too. So you imagine, maybe we could start bolstering the security, because maybe we see something in the intra logs that doesn't look quite right, but maybe in isolation, it might be a bit of a warning, but not necessarily a red flag. But maybe if we see some logs in Entra that we're protecting alongside some signals from Microsoft 365 that we also see, maybe when they're combined together, we could start, alerting people of, potential exfiltration or kind of access into an environment that's kind of unusual. Maybe my OneDrive started sharing information at 2 a.m. and I never do that. Maybe that could be an anomaly. And so once we can understand the information, the systems, we're in the kind of pole position because we can connect into a lot of these systems, obviously with the right access rights, but we can start building this kind of big shared services layer, be it AI or otherwise, and it's not AI wash everything. There's a lot of things that we're going to add value to kind of in that whole data resiliency story that I'm particularly excited about. So yeah, really for me over the next kind of 6-12 months, the development of Veeam Data Cloud, I think, is what I'm most excited about, because it's going to bring all of our technologies and all of our teams together on this big global platform. So it's kind of a bit of everything. I know that's kind of a relatively generic answer, but Veeam Data Cloud is really where it's all kind of centered towards at the moment. And so it's really exciting seeing all these teams work together, from a backup as a service play right through to the tools and products and services that you guys are even using in your cloud. And all those customers that are still there on premise will benefit from all of this as well, because they'll be able to leverage some of the Veeam Data Cloud services, but also a lot of the features that we're building. Maybe it's an indexing service, maybe it's something else. All of these features, particularly from a performance and a scalability perspective, is also being filtered downstream to those products and services too. So all those partners that are already leveraging Veeam, all those customers that are leveraging Veeam on-premise still get a lot of the benefit that we're seeing kind of in Veeam Data Cloud.
Well, we're definitely going to be watching that closely, and obviously as a Veeam partner ourselves, we're really excited to see what's coming down the line, and hopefully you could come back on the podcast in the not too distant future and give us some more updates. Look, it's always great to talk to you, Ben, and really appreciate you coming on today.
Absolutely. No problem, Barry. Anytime.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Lifting the Lid on Technology. We hope you found our discussion insightful and engaging. A special thanks to Veeam for sponsoring this episode and supporting our mission to bring you the latest in technology advancements. Keep up to date and read more insights, including the subjects covered in today's podcast, at svbgroup.co.nz/blog, or search for Softsource vBridge on LinkedIn, where you can leave us a comment. See you in the next episode.